My name is Kirk Overstreet. I grew up in Pomona, right here where we're at. I grew up as a missionary kid in the Caribbean, and after that, my parents got divorced, and my mom moved to San Francisco. My dad moved to South Sacramento, and my sisters and I, we lived with my dad. My dad was a single parent for many years. Thought he was never going to be able to do ministry because of the divorce, but by God's grace and the understanding that he had a call in his life, he was able to pastor a church in southern Sacramento. And we grew up really poor. It was a tough neighborhood back in the 80s when crack cocaine came out. A lot of drugs and violence came with that. Saw a lot of people get killed in front of me. A lot of family, friends in the neighborhood get ravished by drug addiction, the violence, the hard times. Through that, we lived in a house where my dad and I were roommates as I was a young kid. After that, he met my stepmother, Lisa, and she had two kids already. And all of a sudden, they got married. And we were a blended family. It was tough at the time, and eventually had my little sister Ashley that they had together. It was different when it became a household of two families blended, but through all that, they loved us well. They tried to take care of us. I then moved with my mom for my 7th, 8th grade, half of my 8th grade year, to Texas, living with her and my stepfather. And from Texas, they moved to Arizona to live on an Indian reservation, the Hopi reservation, to teach. I didn't really like it. I'm a city boy, so I left. By that time, I moved back with my dad, and he was living in Pomona as he took a church here. The city of Pomona was a little different. It was during the times of Crips and Bloods and all that. Ice-T had a song called Colors, and the movie came out and all that stuff. And just looking at the influence and the culture here, I quickly got involved with it. I didn't get too heavily into it at the beginning. I was a break dancer, and dancing was starting to get big again with house dancing and backyard parties. And being a white kid in an all-black Hispanic neighborhood, it was kind of different for me, even though that's how it's always been for me. I've always felt different, being the white kid, but not just the white kid. Being a pastor's kid was also heavy pressure for me to live up to a standard that everybody projected on me as a pastor's kid. I was supposed to be the kid that never cussed, never smoked, never drank, never partied, never had sex, never got into fights, was clean, a good student. I didn't do any of that. I actually went the opposite route, and eventually in high school, I started using drugs and drinking and partying pretty heavy, and barely graduated from high school. I was dyslexic as a kid, struggled reading, and the way that I would hide my disability was goofing around, causing trouble in the classroom, trying to find ways to get kicked out of the class. But my dad, he helped me through all that to get me to graduate. He would get up early in the morning, take me to school for the early classes to take a bunch of extra credit and stuff, and barely made it. Graduated in '93 from Pomona High School. After that, my stepsister, or my half sister, discovered that I had a lot of drugs in my waterbed, and I was selling, and she didn't know what it was, but my stepmom found it, and my dad confronted me and said, you know, what is this? I said, hey, it's what I do, and didn't really care at the time. I was just in a bad place before Christ. I got kicked out of the house, and my dad said, for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. So if you're going to stay here, this is what you need to do. You need to go to church, you need to cut this out, and you need to live right, and you need to start trying to pursue what's next in your life now that you graduated. I didn't want to hear that, so I left. That ended for a day because it was cold out, and I came back and said, okay, what do I need to do? He said, okay, we're going to get some counseling. We're going to have you go to church. Here's a curfew. I did that for about a week, and then I broke it. So he kicked me out. Long story short, got kicked out of the house 3 times. The last time I was just done. I was like, okay, I'm going to live out in the streets. Lived in my car for a while, lived behind warehouses, couch surf with friends until that would not happen anymore. Went over to my sisters until they saw that I was using drugs and bringing that into their house, and they wouldn't allow that. So eventually I had a roommate, and a roommate of mine started trying to get his life clean, and he was dating a girl that started going to church, and he said, hey, I'm going to go to church. I said, that's good for you, but not for me. But I went one time, and I felt like the pastor was following me around all my life and was on stage telling everybody how bad my life was. And so I was in heavy conviction at the time, and I left really mad. Later on, my roommate and I got in a big fight, threw a beer bottle at me. The next morning, I was at work at the Ontario truck stop, and my father came by. And my father would always try to figure out ways to see me. And I didn't realize that at the time, but he came by to get some gas, and he was asking me how I was doing, and I told him, hey, I just got in a big fight with my roommate, and he needs help, and he's been looking for places to go to get clean and sober. If you know any, let me know. He said, by the way, I was just at a pastor's breakfast, and this man, Pastor Willie, stood up and shared about Set Free and how Set Free has a place where people can go to get off drugs and stuff, and they have a ranch. It's he's never been there. He just heard the information. He said, yeah, they got horses, all that stuff, which wasn't true. Eventually, I told my dad, why don't you talk to my friend? He's ready to get some change in his life. But I'm doing well. Thanks, Dad, for coming by. My dad was pretty radical in his love for Christ and for people, and he never was afraid to go into places that were unwelcoming or scary to most. But he went to places that were just broken and tough, and he went to my house where it was broken and tough and talked to my roommate. And I get to the house, and he's talking to my roommate and telling him about going, and my roommate says yes to it. And then he challenges me, would you want to go? And I said, no, I'm all right. And then he said, well, I'll take you to a nice steak dinner before we head out there to the church. And I had the munchies at the time, so I said, sure, let's go. So we went to the church, and that night, I would never forget it. It was actually in 1996, 22 years ago, where I met the Lord in a special way, where the pastor was preaching, and I stood up and I started walking down to the aisle. It was pews at the time, and I get to the middle of the aisle and start to walk down, and I look back and I see my father and my friends and who were with us, and I was like, what am I doing? Why am I standing up right now? And why do I feel like I need to go forward? Because I knew growing up in church, when you go forward, you do business with God. And I didn't feel like I could, because I was not in a good place. I was high. My mind was all over the place, and I had all different theories and thoughts. And eventually my feet just started going forward, and I started walking. And as I started walking forward, I just reflected. It was like the Lord was showing me all the times that He was with me and He loved me. And I remembered the stories, because my father would take me out knocking on doors. He'd take me out to do vacation Bible schools in the neighborhoods during the summer. I'd go to camps, had youth ministry, all those things that were just moments of telling me how goodness and God's goodness was. It all just flooded at that same moment, and I just started crying. I didn't cry for a long time, and that was the first time, and I just started crying, and I was kind of embarrassed because I was in front of people I've never met, but at the same time I felt such joy to just be able to cry in freedom, knowing that God loved me. And I knew that for the very first time. It was so clear that God loved me right where I was at. And so I got on my knees and I was crying, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, and it was my roommate. He was there to give his heart to Jesus. We said the prayer. That was 22 years ago, and I'd never forget how my father was instrumental and pointed me in the right direction, not just when I was a kid, but even at that moment when I was at my worst. From there, I got discipled, went out to the ranch, got sobered up, but most of all trained up in the Word. And I was there for 3.5 months. When I was there, I felt a call to be a pastor, which I never wanted to be. Growing up as a pastor's kid, I saw church, and then I saw after it was done, and I saw the same people in church not being the same as they were in the gathering. I saw the fakeness. I saw them, the people that my dad loved and would help and care for, spend time with, all of a sudden cussing him out, mad at him, blaming issues on him. I saw all that. And so I thought the church was fake, and as well, we lived poor. He loved the people and took care of them. He would, give out of his own pocket to give groceries and help other people out. And so we saw him live just poor. We were poor. At the same time, he would work heavy hours. And so I said, I'm not going to be a pastor. I don't want to be disrespected. I want to make money. I don't want to have these crazy hours and deal with people that don't want to be loved. And so I argued with God for a while, and then I realized that God, He took my sins, my worst. Why wouldn't I give Him my best? Why wouldn't I give Him the rest of my life? And so I surrendered to the ministry, and I shared that with my father, and he was concerned. He was like, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm sure." And he said, "All right, let me start walking with you." And sure enough, he took me alongside and started training me and bringing me into different gatherings that would equip me. He started a pastor school at our church and started equipping alongside other men with me. And I saw my father do all these things. And then eventually I planted a church, and that's what my dad does, is he was planting churches all over and helping the planters. And so I planted a church right in this city that I did a lot of garbage in, a lot of madness, dealing and fighting and doing all kinds of silly stuff in the city of Pomona. And so I planted a church, and my father walked alongside, coached me, helped me, mentored me. From there, I started helping plant more churches and more churches locally, nationally, and even in international countries. And it was good to reflect and talk to my dad and learn from him. Eventually, I was hired on by the North American Mission Board as a church planter catalyst, which I do now, where I go and walk with pastors and those that are kind of kicking the tires, wondering if they're called to the ministry. I walk with them and to really just champion them, assess them, help them with their strategies and their vision, get them networked with local churches, and let them know you can't do this alone. It's a kingdom thing. It's not just one denomination. It's just not this group. We have to do this all together. And those are other lessons that I learned from my father. My father would teach me that it's not all you. You can't do it alone. You need others. And so I would be able to walk alongside with guys. At that time, my dad was also hired by the North American Mission Board for 20 years. He did it. And so we went from being father-son to father being my pastor and mentor and teaching me. Then we became laborers in the harvest field together. And it was just incredible to work alongside with each other, strategize, share different knowledge and wisdom and techniques and strategies with each other. And it just felt like he let me be on an equal plane with him on those things. And then it came from him being my co-laborer to where he became my best friend. And it was like I couldn't wait to call him and just talk to him about not just the ministry, but hey, did you watch that game? Did you watch that USC game? Did you watch that Dodger and the Cubs? And did you watch the Lakers? And did you see what's going on with the politics? Did you see what's going on with the economics? Did you hear about that shooting? Did you hear about this? And it was like a friend conversation instead of a father conversation. So we became from me being a dependent young boy who had to live under his house, to where I got kicked out of his house, to where then I got received back into his house, and then I got equipped and strengthened to go outside of the house. And then we became workers together, to where the last days we became friends. And my father died about a month ago, and it's been really hard. But the good thing is that I know he's in the cloud of witnesses, and he's still saying, keep going, you got this. He trained me well, he loved me well, and he taught me well. Today I'm a father, and I also have stepsons, and he taught me how to love stepkids, being a stepfather. And so he trained me to be a good father, not just to my natural kids, but to my stepsons, which I love dearly. He's taught me how to be a good husband. He's taught me how to be a good friend. But most of all, he taught me who God is. And that love, we hear the agape love that God has. We hear his unconditional love, and we read about it, and we preach it, we study it. But I got to experience it through the flesh of my father, by his unconditional love for me when I was at my worst. He didn't disown me, he didn't put me away. But I found out a few months, actually about a year or so after I got clean and sober and started walking with the Lord pretty strong, driving up to a conference together, I asked him, how did you deal with me? Why did you deal with me? Why did you put up with the madness and all the junk I beat my dad up, in a sense, with the verbiage, with the language I would say to him. At one time, he hurt himself pretty bad, and he had a sling in his arm, and he went through some health issues, and I wanted to go to a party, and he stood between me and the door of me walking out, and I just grabbed him and I pushed him, and I treated him terrible. And through all those things, he still loved me, and I didn't understand that. And so he told me there was days after I was in the streets that he'd just drive around during the day and during the nights, just trying to find me. And it broke my heart to know that he did that, but at the same time, it was just another picture of Jesus and how he loves us relentlessly, and he doesn't give up on us, and he doesn't look at us the way most people do, where if we've hurt them, we've disappointed them, or they can't get nothing from us, they don't want nothing from us. They don't want nothing to do with us. And I didn't have anything to give to my dad. There was nothing that was going to give him joy that I can give him at that moment, but he still wanted me. And that just showed me the Father's heart, is that he desires that none perish but have everlasting life. His desire is that he would look at the cross as joy set before him. He looked at that bowl that he wanted to say, Father, take this away from me, but not my will, but your will be done. And so the will of God is that none should perish. The will of God is that we be set free from the things that destroy us and hurt us. And he wants us to see the truth of his love by his relationship with the Father. He desires his disciples to be one as him and the Father are one. And so I've seen that through my father in his oneness with God, but also his oneness with me, with his wife, with other children, with other friends, with other pastors, with strangers, picking up people that are homeless and on drugs. He'd go visit the prisons, and he'd go into Skid Row and all these different places, and just love people the same as if he was at a Ritz-Carlton hotel with the nice fluffy dresses and everybody's looking clean and sharp. He wouldn't look at them different than someone who's living in a tent on a cold night in downtown LA in Skid Row. He loved them just the same, and he'd hug them just as strong. And so I got to see God, the Father, through my father. In Matthew 13:44, Jesus is trying to express, he's trying to get across how important we are, and how the kingdom is like, and who he is and what his whole mission is. Everybody's wondering, this Jesus is incredible, and all these people around him, who is this Jesus? So he tries to describe it in their terms. And so he likens it to a man that sees a field. This field is dingy, it's dirty, it maybe has weeds, trash. It's a field that nobody has purchased yet, nobody wants it. And so he likens it to the man that walks into the field. He stubs his toe, in a sense. He looks down and he sees this buried treasure. He finds this treasure, looks around and says, wow, this is valuable. And so he covers it up with the purpose of saying, I need to go buy it. I can't have it unless I buy it. And so he walks away from that treasure with joy, because he knows nobody else wants it. It's unpurchased. So he goes away and he purchases it. That's what Jesus has done for us. Look, our world, us, ourselves, we're messy. We have flaws. We have sin that has ravished our bones, our bodies, our spirit, and it's detached us. It's made us filthy. But Jesus, he sees something special in us, and he sees each and every one of us as a treasure. And so his treasure, his desire was, I'm going to die on the cross. The cross that was set before him, he looked at it with joy, because he knew what he was purchasing was us. And so he sees us as worthy to purchase. And so he dies on that cross while yet we're still sinners, while yet we had not everything together. We didn't have the addictions, we didn't have our behaviors, we didn't have the age and status, and we didn't have wealth or this or that. All those things don't matter, because Jesus sees you as beautiful. He's created each and every one of us, and his heart is that none of us perish but have everlasting life. And so he dies on the cross for us, and he wants to purchase us. How does he purchase us? By his blood. And it's a heavy price that he paid, but he paid it for you and I, and you need to receive that purchase. You need to say, okay, you can have my field, you can have my body, you can have my life, you can have all of it, even the mess, the trash and everything. And you know what? He will take that, because he sees something beautiful within us. You may not see that beauty within you right now, but when you get the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you get your life to Christ, it says, greater is he that's in you than that's in the world. That's Jesus residing. He wants to come in. He knocks at the door saying, let me in. I want to dine with you. So let Jesus into your life, and get to realize you're a treasure. Change your value of who you are. See what God sees you as. He sees you as a beautiful treasure worth purchasing. My name is Kirk Overstreet, and I am a son.